My name is Kel. I am not entirely interesting, so I'm going to tell you about my grandmother. In February of this year, she turned 100 years old. Thank you. I'll never make it, so good for her. 100 years is a long time to be alive, and you accumulate a lot of stories in those 100 years. And I think the story of my grandmother that I like the most is a time when, living in Florida about 15 years ago, she had the opportunity to play golf and have lunch with a famous rock star by the name of Vincent Furnier. Have you heard of him? He goes by the stage name of Alice Cooper. I'm not kidding. This really happened. She told me all about it. She goes, I met, what's his name? Alice Cooper. Like, you what? Oh, and Vincent, I met his daughter, and he had a tuna salad sandwich for lunch. He's a lovely man, and he plays golf all the time. I'm thinking, woman, what are you talking about? And I thought about this quite a bit. Probably more than I should have, but I mean, how could you not? And it occurred to me that my grandmother and Alice Cooper actually have quite a bit in common. They are members of the fastest growing age demographic in the world, people over the age of 65. I'm going to show you a graph. This y-axis is life expectancy, how long people are living, starting at about 40 and going up to 90. So the higher up we plot, longer people live. This x-axis here is the percentage of those years that people expect to be healthy. What is healthy? Free of long-term illness, long-term injury, disability, things like that, starting at about 79 to about 89%. So in 1990, the Global Burden of Disease Commission did a study, and they profiled 247 countries, and they plotted on this graph. It looks something like this, meaning that in 1990, you could expect to live between, say, 50 and 80 years and have 81 to 88% of those years be relatively healthy. Fast forward 22 years, they did the study again. It looked a little different. Dot slid up, meaning people are living longer. Dot slid to the left, meaning people aren't necessarily living better. If you're a male in this country, you can expect to live 10 years of your life with a disability. If you're a female, 13 years. I want you to park that just for a second, because I'm going to talk about innovation. Because I have clients who work in the healthcare space, and they all say the same thing. We want to be innovative. And I was talking to someone once, and she was saying, well, there's blue oceans. It's where, things are discovered and made. And then there's the red oceans, which is, littered with the blood of the entrails of my competition. I don't know what she was going on about. It was very strange. And I thought innovation is kind of strange because, it's very funny what we choose to be innovative about at the time that we choose to be innovative. 2 summers ago, this guy got into a little metal hut, and he closed the door, and he went up in the sky, 21 miles up in the sky, not quite to outer space, but pretty close. While he's up there, he opens the door, which is a perfectly sane thing to do. He looked around, yelled Geronimo, jumped out, went down, hit the ground, got up, walked away, and we all watched it live. It's amazing. So yeah, it's great. And yet, when I work with people who make websites or apps or things, and I say, have you thought about people who can't see? Have you thought about people who can't hear? Have you thought about people who can't walk, people who don't have use of their hands? And oh my God, the wailing I hear, like, that's going to be hard, man. We can't do that. That is so tough. I've been doing this a while. I know why it happens. And I think Robin Christopherson says it very well. He told The Guardian UK. He said, historically, we tend to think about accessibility for those with disabilities as an afterthought, the nice to have, if we have the time, if we have the budget, if we feel like it, if we get sued, if Kel doesn't shut up. Any number of things that kind of play in there. And the one I always hear is, the accessibility will constrain design. We tend to think of innovation as devices. 5.5 years ago when the iPad came out, everybody went, yay, the iPad! It's going to change everything. And you're going to go to the doctor, and she's going to have an iPad. And you're going to go buy a car, and they're going to have an iPad. And you're going to go, buy chopsticks. And there's going to be, iPad. And then you have this backlash, as always kind of happens. And then, like water, it kind of finds its level. And we look back and we think, remember when we used to think that? That was very quaint. And then it happens all over again. Google Glass. Oh my God, this is going to change everything. Everyone's going to be wearing them. You're going to walk around, and then you have the backlash. And just this week on Monday, I read an article, The Death of Google Glass. That was fast. And we're going to think, all right, that's great. And it's going to start all over again. Yay, the wearables. Okay, just stop. Stop and take a breath. And this is why I have started to think about innovation and design in things other than technology and in things other than devices. For example, what's happening in the Philippines, where during monsoon season, people in slums live in these corrugated tin huts, and they live in near darkness because they don't have electricity, and they can't make fires because it's very dangerous. And what electricity is there is set up by rogue technicians, and again, fire. So a group called the My Shelter Foundation has come up with a very interesting solution. They have gone to these corrugated tin huts, and they stuffed in the roofs plastic bottles filled with chlorinated water, and the sun shines through the bottle, creating the equivalent of 55 watts of natural light. And they've installed this in 12,000 homes in the Philippines. I'm fascinated by this. That's amazing to me. In Nairobi, Kenya, there is an all-female technology group called Akira Chicks. I just want to repeat that. There is an all-female technology group in Nairobi, Kenya, right? Just think about that for a while. And they're amazing. If you have more stories from Africa and developing countries, I really want to hear them. Oh my gosh. What they've done is they've discovered that there's a real problem with crop corruption. So they created a very simple SMS texting app. Farmers all know what the price is, no one gets squeezed out of the market, food security increases, and everyone is economically healthy. I am fascinated by things like this. And you know, the analogy I always come back to is things like a forest, which is dark and dirty and chaotic. And out of all this seeming chaos, a bird will build a nest out of things that it finds. There's a term for this in biology. It's called niche construction. It's what an organism has to do in order to sustain its survival. And what's really interesting is that people with disabilities and those who work on behalf of those with disabilities are doing this today. They're macheting through the technology landscape, and they're not held back by design constraints and devices. They're making their own stuff, and they're developing products that otherwise would not exist, like this Braille iPhone that was developed by a blind student at the University of Auburn. I was talking to a friend of mine a while ago, and we were talking about how this isn't really a new thing, right? That thing on the left is the first typewriter. It was invented by a guy named Pellegrino Turri because he was in love with a blind countess. And he said, it'd be wonderful if you'd write me love letters. And she said, I can't, because writing, paper, ink, blind. And so he invented this machine so she could do that. I think I'm a pretty good husband, if you ask my wife. I mean, she may agree with that, I think. I've never done this. I don't tell my wife this story. The thing on the right is the first audiophone. Back before Braille was commonplace in schools, educators hired thespians to come in and read books because they could speak very well. And they recorded them, and they pressed these recordings on thick slabs of wax. And these slabs of wax became the first vinyl records, which became the 8-track cassette, which became the cassette recorder, and the compact disc, and the MP3, and Spotify, and whatever comes next. So many devices that we rely on today have come from people who were inventing on behalf of those with disabilities. This is Austin Seraphin. He's a blind iOS developer that lives in Philadelphia, where I live. And he was telling me once about echolocation. If you go to the airport sometime, or you go to a public place, and you see someone who's blind, watch them for a while, because some people are very good at this. They do like a... And you're thinking, what are they doing? And what they're doing is they've been trained to kind of with their ears measure the echo and figure out where they are in the space. And what Austin has said is, I can actually see visual forms around me. I can see through the sound instead of seeing through the light. And this same design modality has impacted innovation in some pretty interesting ways. This is a walking stick with a sensor on it about halfway up. I don't know if you've ever seen like someone with a walking stick. They're pretty good at measuring, obstructions when you're doing this. But if you go to the bank and there's a velvet rope maybe right here, and then you kind of go, oh, and that happened once where I live. We had to run over and kind of bring them back over. You all right? And that vibrates when it gets near an obstruction. And what I love about this example is if you look at that, you see there's gears and duct tape and wires hanging out of it, but it does work, as does this sneaker, which was invented by a young man named Anirudh Sharma. Same thing, it has an Arduino lily pad in the heel and has vibrating sensors all the way around it. And as a person walks around it, measures that, okay, there's a thing here, okay, and it kind of vibrate, and okay, and you can kind of navigate a space. This is Iris Connolly. She is now 7 years old, lives in Essex in the UK. At the age of 2, she got ill while on holiday with a brain tumor, had at least one surgery, I think 2, and underwent about 6 months of radiation therapy. And she loved tracing things on the iPad while she sat in the hospital. She just loved just kind of moving her finger and moving the apps around and things like that. And so her father, Sean, decided it's time to reteach her the ABC. She needs to kind of get the cognitive skills back. Okay, Iris, here's a pencil and paper. Didn't work. I'm going to get the thing. Okay. And, they tried that a few times. And finally, Sean realized, maybe there's something out there for the iPad where she can relearn the alphabet and maybe kind of get up to speed on this. And it didn't exist. So he created it. He created his own. It's called the Share My ABCs app. And I love this because it's so simple. It gives her a phonetic clue what the letter is. She can trace it with her finger, as you see here. That can be put into words and phrases and export as an email. The other cool thing is, this is now being used in special education programs all around the world. It's been translated in 8 languages, and for his effort, Mr. Sean Conley gets 25% of royalties, all because he wanted his daughter to be able to read. This is the mother of Chad Rubel, who I met a few years ago at South by Southwest. She is unable to use a keyboard due to a stroke she had several years ago, so he took apart a Microsoft Connect and invented a program that she could send emails, just do gestures. Again, very simple, but it's a way to connect people with those who they care about. I was visiting the Bloorview Holland Rehab Hospital a few years ago in Toronto, and their entire innovation department is based around this niche construction idea, and everywhere you go, there's wires and things and stuff, there's things on fire and all kinds of stuff. And they invented this really interesting communication device called the Hummer Switch, and it just fits comfortably on a child's neck, so all she has to do is hum, like that, and it affects a speech synthesizer. It's very similar to the app that's used by this young man named Lee Ridley, who's a stand-up comedian in the UK. And I'm going to show you a 2-minute clip of his first session that took place in London. I should mention that he has cerebral palsy. So we'll watch this for a bit.
Simply walking down the street is a challenge for Lee Ridley. He's lived with cerebral palsy since birth and is unable to speak. He uses a voice synthesizer to communicate. But Lee has learned to laugh in the face of adversity, and he's making other people chuckle along with him. He's taken to stand-up comedy, performing as Lost Voice Guy. And tonight's a big night. It's his first paid booking, and he's playing to a packed house in the British capital.
Thank you for that lovely welcome. I haven't felt this important since the doctors said I was going to be a special child. When I realized I'd never be able to talk again, I was speechless. People have often asked me why I want to put myself in a position where everyone can stare and laugh at me. The truth is that it happens to me every day anyway. At least this way there's a scheduled time and place for it. I am not related to Stephen Hawking in any way. However, I do hate the way people take the of the way he speaks. I can really synthesize with him. I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. Goodbye.
I've always believed that any subject can be joked about if handled correctly. I think I can get away with more because it's essentially about me. I'd like to think the audience go away with a more positive view on disability.
About every month or so, we see another article that shows up of some parent in their garage who got a 3D printer and they made a hand for their kid who didn't used to have a hand, and that hand that they created is so much better than the one they would buy from a prosthetic company and all kinds of insurance things and things like that. So once you buy the printer, it's like, $30 worth of filament, and you get it, and you actually make the hand. And we keep hearing stories like this. It's not quite as novel as it was when it first started happening, maybe 1.5 to 2 years ago. And I wanted to understand better, what compels a parent to do this. And myself not having kids maybe is just because I don't have kids and I'm not a parent, I don't get this. But there's something about no, I'm going to create a hand in my garage today, which I find really kind of interesting. One person I talked to was the parents of Mason Ellsworth, who is 24 years old and lives in West Virginia. He's a former music prodigy. He used to play 6 instruments fluently, and in July of 2008, he was all set to go to college on a full music scholarship. And he got into a car accident and suffered what's called traumatic brain injury, TBI, and went into a coma for 6 months. And when he came back, his parents thought, we don't want him to just exist. We want him to be a part of things. We want him to become hopefully a productive taxpayer, at least reactivate the muse. And so they've started using apps, some they create, some they find, to help him regenerate that and make him feel like there's a reason for him to wake up in the morning other than do therapy. This is Dana Florence and her family. Dana runs a nonprofit organization called 3 2B out of Ontario. She herself is the mother of 3 kids with cerebral palsy. I was talking to her, and members of her staff, and they said, the most frustrating thing as a parent is waiting for something that might be in some hospital lab or university somewhere, and knowing that we won't ever have access to it. I know it would change my child's life, but I just can't get a hold of it. There's a financial constraint, there's a logistic constraint, and all kinds of things that come into play. That's one part of it. There's also the technical part of it, and I want to understand this. So I was at Stanford University about a month ago, and I held this thing in my hand, this 3D printed piece of titanium. I didn't know what it was for a while, and I realized I'm holding a piece of somebody's skull. They're actually 3D printing bone replacement and trying this with people who come back, say, from combat. And we're not that far away from printing DNA. And we're not that far away also from being able to control cybernetic body parts just by thinking about them using something called an electrocardiographic implant. Sensors we put right into the brain so that we can control these bionic arms just by thinking about it. And I don't know about you, but I just think this is just getting really weird. Okay, it's just getting a little too fast, it's just getting strange, and I don't know if this is necessarily good. And I was telling a friend of mine about this, and I said, I don't get it. I get it, but I don't get it. I just wonder if we're just making stuff, and we don't know where we're going with it, and at what point do we separate the cyber humanity from the humanity? If it makes any sense. And then I read a story about Kathy Hutchinson, who's 57 years old, using BrainGate technology, literally plugged into her head, and you can see it, and using this thought-control bionic tool, took a sip of water unassisted for the first time in 17 years. And if you watch this video, you look, and that is not the face of a cyborg. That's the face of somebody who finally feels human. And it reminds me of something my friend Carl Groves told me. He goes, you know what? Don't think of accessibility as a constraint. Don't think of it as a design consideration. What you're really doing is providing a fundamental human service that benefits as many people as possible in as many situations as possible. That's all it is. Summing up, where's the blue ocean, if you want to call it that? I'll give you 5 takeaways. And these are lessons I've learned personally as well. One is understanding that there is a social model of exclusion in our society. It really starts in grade school, right? Where we take kids with disabilities and we put them on a special bus, and we take them to a special building, and we give them special friends. These are your friends, and we give them a special teacher. And that sequestering becomes a social norm. And I'm not saying it's our responsibility as a design community to fix that. It is our responsibility to understand why and how that happens. Because if we do, we begin to recognize that competence is really a continuum. We are all good at some things and not so good at others. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Thomas Armstrong writes about the theory of neurodiversity, where he says, there is great value to recognizing people in the disability sector because it reminds us that we are part of a human ecosystem. Doing that, we then focus on the evolutionary aspects of accessibility rather than the constraints. We don't think of it like something that's going to hurt us as a design. It's not like, oh yeah, accessibility, we got to think about that. This is how a human species evolves. As examples, I would encourage you to pay attention to the curb cuts around us, right? Look for things that clearly were invented for people, who have various challenges, and think about what you might have done differently. Or maybe look at other products, basic household things like a coffee cup lid, a hammer and a nail to hang a picture, a fire extinguisher, the game of Twister. How would you design these things for somebody who can't see, and somebody who can't hear, somebody who can't walk, somebody who can't use their hands? Because if you do all this, you achieve the 5th goal, which is building empathy. This is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot. When people know what I do, and I have a company that does this stuff, and they go, oh, it's so great that you help those poor people. I don't like that, because it comes off as a little patronizing. That's not really what empathy is. Dr. Michael Graves, who's being shown here, says that very well. He went to the hospital at the age of 68. Sinus infection. Woke up paralyzed. This could happen to any one of us. Bacteria is very weird. And so he wrote a blog post, which I'm going to read to you, this first paragraph here, about how he knew his life would be different from that point forward. He said, early on, my first day out of bed at Kessler Hospital, I went into the bathroom in my wheelchair to shave. I looked in the mirror, and the bottom of it was at the height of my forehead. I could not see my face, so there was no shaving with a straight razor. An electric razor was brought to me. I tried to plug it in, and it was out of reach. And I thought, well, at least I can wash my face, but I couldn't reach the faucet. So the next day, my surgeon came by. I asked him to get in the wheelchair. I strapped him in, and he couldn't reach anything. I asked, who designed this? And he said, experts. Now, we do need experts, but we also need empathy, because otherwise we run the risk of potentially over-engineering accessibility. We see a situation which clearly is crying out for it, and we don't really think about how practical that solution is. I would not want to be a wheelchair flying down this ramp in Minsk. So please do think about empathy. right? Please do think about the stories I've told you here about Iris and Kathy and what we learned from other cultures and with Austin and Lost Voice Sky and Dr. Graves and my grandmother and Chad Rubel's mother and Alice Cooper. Don't forget him. He needs help too, okay? Because the reality is that design innovation is really about extending human capability. It has always been about extending human capability, whether we're talking about the first prosthetic hand developed in the 1800s, or that science fiction weird world where we're going to be born with the technology already infused with our bodies, right? You know, that science fiction world it's here, it's upon us, we're living it, we're creating it. So I'll leave you with this quote by the science fiction writer William Gibson when he says, "The future has already arrived, it is just not evenly distributed yet." But design will fix that. My name's Kel Smith. If you're at all interested, I wrote a book about this stuff. It's called Digital Outcasts: Moving Technology Forward Without Leaving People Behind. People tell me it's good. They can't all be wrong. And I run a company called Anikto, which is named after the Greek word for open. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. I've had a really fun time the last 2 days. Thanks so much. Cheers.